Today we're talking about everything that you need to know to get started in Soulframe, which is Digital Extreme's new RPG exploration game that has MMO elements and survival game elements, and you'll recognize a lot of the mechanics that are inside the game as well. And it is planned to eventually be free to play, though right now you have to buy the Founders Packs in order to gain access if you didn't already have it already. The character creation is a little bizarre, as is Digital Extreme's way of life. You will start out by stylizing your mother, and the traits that your mother has will be passed on to you when you are born. So essentially, you are customizing your character by customizing your mom in the ancestry as part of that. So just be a little more wary when you're making this selection. Next, you'll be given this screen here, which is a selection of a starting class of sorts. It's not actually a class, but you kind of think of it that way when you're making this choice. You'll see the three different virtues, which are the primary statistics in the game right now: spirit, grace, and courage. And you can loosely think of these as strength for courage. Grace is actually going to be more like dexterity, and spirit is going to be more of an intelligence caster playstyle. However, your character is pretty much freely customizable, which means you will be able to select ability sets called Pacts in the game, and depending on which pact you have, that determines what abilities your character can use. You can also freely change up your primary weapon and your sidearm weapon as well. So just because you're starting with, say, a path of courage that gives you a long sword and, tank-like abilities, it doesn't mean you can't customize that later on. So when you're making this first selection, I would just encourage you to look at the left side and only read the three abilities that come with the pact, because you can actually get a couple weapons early on and swap that out if you choose to, but unlocking and grinding packs in the game to get new abilities takes a little bit longer. So if you were to make a more defining choice in this opening segment, I would choose either the weapon that you really enjoy, be it melee, bow, or caster playstyle, or just choose the abilities that make the most sense for you. The Path of Courage comes with a taunt and some defensive mechanism, which are useful for the start of the game. The Path of Grace has a really nice ability to spawn a decoy that will draw aggro for you, which can save your life if you get into a really hard spot. And Spirit has a hard stun lock where you can turn enemies into stone. It also has a ground-based deployable heal, which will save you some consumables. So that kind of helps you determine which one of these you may want to start with. Once you're in game at any time on PC, you can hold the tab key once you unlock this very first quest, and you'll be able to teleport to your main hub called the Nightfold. And this place is where you're going to be doing all your interaction for crafting, talking to NPCs, completing long quest lines, talking to other players, but also messing with your gear, your armory, and your customization inside of this main hut here. As you find NPCs to unlock throughout the story, they will appear as crafting stations that you can talk to and interact with out here. But inside this primary hut is where you're going to be able to change up your weapon, change up your ability sets, add totems, and things like that. So in here, you can see that we can actually go over here and we can change the pact that we have here based on which one you choose, what character you have currently, and you'll be able to unlock other ones that aren't part of the initial three that you choose, and that's where you're going to be choosing your three abilities. And again, these ones take a little bit longer to farm depending on how far into the game you are, so it is worth thinking about, but you can unlock all of them and change them up if you'd like to. You also get the choice of these combat arms. The starter weapons are going to be the long blade, the staff, or the magic, or the bow, but there's tons of other ones. You see there's 5 listed here already. There is a pole arm, there is a great sword, the fly daggers or the fly blades. You can also pick up the short blade, and there's also a shield setup as well, and you can mix and match these as you choose. Each one of these does have a set of passives that you can choose and put points into to make them stronger or more interesting. Things like adding extra flourishes, parries, ripostes, or counterattacks, and things like that. Now, when you're jumping into combat, you're going to recognize a lot of things from a Souls-like game, but I would say that there's not really enough here to call this a Souls-like game. It is an action-style RPG, but this one's kind of hard to nail down because it does have elements from many different genres coming together. So what you might recognize is a little bit more of locked animations, especially for a survival-esque game to play around with. You do have this healing potion, which can function just like your normal heal charges. You will be able to use this by pressing H on PC, and this will allow you to heal up, and you can replenish this by going to a rest area or by collecting red consumables on the ground, which will give you a new charge of that heal potion. But of course, you could always use abilities like with the spirit tree to be able to heal yourself back up if you don't want to use a potion or if you don't have any charges left over. Diving into combat, it will be a little bit different depending on the weapon set you're using, whether it's like a ranged physical weapon, a caster weapon, or a melee weapon. However, they all have the same similar inputs. There's going to be a primary attack that you will use with just left click on PC, and this will either be a projectile with magic, an arrow with the bow, or a melee attack with one of the melee weapons. weapons. However, every weapon also has a secondary fire that will take form into different things depending on what weapon you're using. Most of them, if you hold down the right click, it ends up being a block, though only the melee weapons at base can do a parry if you block the second the attack hits you. There are ways to add through the talent trees and bonuses to make the magic weapons do something similar, but usually parrying and counterattacking is a melee weapon exclusive, and so with the ranged weapons, you'll be dealing with more space control and being able to move around that way. There's also a third attack, which default keybind on PC, I believe, is mouse 3, and this is going to be your heavy attack. So while you have your light attacks, you also have the ability to do a heavy attack with the mouse 3, or the middle mouse scroll wheel button on PC. This will allow you to wind up. This is exceptionally useful for enemies that have high armor, and you'll see when their HP bar turns gray and things like that, it tells you that their armor is exceptionally high and your weapon damage is going to be greatly reduced, but it's also good for going through blocks. So if you end up having armored enemies that put a shield up or they're blocking for whatever reason, you can very easily switch to doing a heavy attack and break through that, but the enemies can also do the same thing. However, when enemies do heavy attacks, you will see a golden glow that flashes on the weapon. Again, if you've played action games before, this kind of flash is should be very familiar and recognizable. So when you see that golden glow on an enemy weapon, it means they're going for a heavy attack, which means you can go for a super clutch perfect dodge or parry, or you just get out of the way, which means you're in the safe spot. For mobility, again, you can parry with some of the melee weapons as well, but you could also use shift on PC, which is just kind of your start of sprint button, but if you just tap it, you'll do a little hop. If you're not going in any directions, it'll go backwards, but if you're moving, it'll go into a different direction, which is a little hop. It allows you to avoid some minor attacks, but if there's a big explosion coming, someone throws an explosive on you, or a large attack, a big slam, you can double tap it to do a roll instead, which will give you a little bit of freedom and also be able to cover some distance. Again, there are some explosions they'll throw on top of you that the best response is just to roll out of the way instead of trying to do the perfect hit on it. Some weapons have the ability to throw your weapon like melee weapons. You can also do kicks and things like that, and there are some very specific style abilities that will prop up depending on what pact you're using, what weapon you're using, and what your overall play style is set up as. Now, the game does have stagger, so you probably recognize this as poise or stagger or hardiness and that sort of thing. This is a mechanic that's on your character, but primarily on enemies. You'll see a stagger bar building up on the enemy if you deal damage to them and they're blocking or guarding. There are also a lot of abilities like the starter spirit ability, which sends out birds, which is really good at building up stagger. And just like you'd expect with a Souls-like game, even though this isn't one, you would also be able to, once the stagger reaches maximum, they will be knelt on the ground and be stunned for a second, which allows you to punish them. And some builds, some weapons can actually do a counterattack or like a riposte or critical attack on that target once the stagger meter hits full. Now, you will also run into enemies that have a gray health bar, and they will have a gray X over their level when you run into them. This is a rather unique mechanic for Soulframe and a little bit confusing at first when you first run into it, because you're like, what does gray mean? It doesn't even have a level on it. And actually, all it's doing is dynamically calculating the damage of your weapon if you were to attack the target, and if the target has more defenses than your weapon is capable of doing, then it's going to floor your damage. It's going to bring your damage down to a very low value, in some cases down all the way to 1, depending on the armor that's there. But because this is a dynamic calculation, it gets really weird, right? You might run into enemies that are really like only 1 or 2 defense higher than your threshold, which means that if you were to do a self buff or throw out a heavy attack, you might break right through that defense, and that gray meter is a misnomer, because if you just buff yourself slightly, you could get over it. So it's more of a barometer helping you to understand that when you're facing an enemy, one that might be a little bit too tanky, and you might need to rely on either running away and getting stronger, or rely on more armor breaking attacks, doing like heavy attacks, or using self buffs or bonuses or spells that might go through it because the target is incredibly tanky. Next, we need to talk about smites, and smites is actually a really important part of the gameplay. And this is going to be when any enemy triggers a smite, they will have a glowing orb that appears around their body. There are several different kinds, but when you see this, all you have to do is perform a smite attack in order to rip that out of them. If it's a weak enemy, they'll be insta-killed on the spot. If it's a medium to hard level enemy, they'll usually get staggered a little bit and take some damage when you do the smite attack on them. Now, when you're running around the game, you do have a Witcher sense. I call it Witcher sense because this is what I always want. Anytime this kind of thing shows up, it's always Witcher sense to me, because it feels feels like the Witcher games, but in general, this is basically just a sonar scan ability. This is default Q on PC, but this is going to be your scan that allows you to look around, and as you can see, it helps you find things. You can find things that are worth collecting, items, materials, things like that. You can hold this button and hover over enemies to see what level they are, or if they have gray health bars, that sort of thing, but also allows you to perform this smite motion, which is useful for combat, but also for capturing animals and doing things like that. So while you don't have the glow ability, the Witcher sense, out in general, if you left click or basic attack, you'll just shoot, but if you were to hold down the Witcher sense and then left click, it'll do that smite pull, which if there's anything pullable nearby, you'll be able to grab it. This includes motes. If you've seen materials floating around and they're glowing, you can do the smite attack on enemies if they have that green, blue, or orange glow on their body, but it also allows you to capture companions when you find them out in the field. So if you ever run into wild animals like bunnies or birds or things like that, you can do the smite attack on them, which will trigger this companion capture. All you have to do is do the Ocarina of Time thing, or you just hit these. We can just do this live real quick. Hit the number associated with it. You'll gather, if you hit the number of things that you need, you will gather the collection from that wild animal, but it is the same process. You just hold down your Witcher sense and left click or primary attack, and it will allow you to either do a combat attack, pull anything floating, or capture companions that might be moving around. Next, let's talk about exploration, because it's going to be the primary driving force for you in Soulframe in general. So hopefully this isn't a spoiler for anybody, but you're going to be going around and exploring this entire map, revealing it, finding things like that, and kind of going through different areas. But what's cool about Soulframe, as it's not meant to be a canned single-player experience, it is an online game, which means a lot of these things, like the dungeons you run into, like Glades of Enderin, there's 2 dungeons in the game right now, they will respawn and procedurally generate a new layout with new loot and new items every time you run through it. So doing runs of these, there's even puzzle areas and things like that you can complete in order to make the game fresh and new for you. Now, we talked about the Witcher sense already, where you hold Q and you can reveal things nearby that are interactable or destructible or capturable in general, but there is also your guide bird. This is a bird that travels with you. You can see he's on my shoulder right now. This is where the Founders Pack cosmetics come in as well, and at any point you can press the G key in order to summon your guide bird, and then your guide bird will take you to your waypoint. Not only does this work for quests and other things like that that have waypoints, but if you're inside a procedurally generated dungeon, it will also guide you to the treasure at the end of the dungeon or whatever guide points you have. So you're going to be using your guide bird a lot. So when you're stuck, press G, summon the guide bird and follow it, and this will give you a sense of direction when you're moving around, especially when you first start the game and the entire map is Fog of War, and it just spits you out of the very short tutorial and says, have fun, good luck, don't break a leg, that sort of thing. However, it's important to note that there is a lot of broken chains in this game by design. They basically want you to get lost in the moment and explore, and so there will be times where your bird, your guide bird, stops in place and just hovers there. It's not, you know, going on mutiny. It basically says that you're in the area and it wants you to explore and look around, and so you want to kind of just go to different camps, fight different enemies, open chests, look for items, and you'll find lots of good stuff, and once you get into the next breadcrumb of that, the guide bird will pick up and start going to a new waypoint after that. Now, we talked about this at the beginning, but anytime you feel like you need to go back to your base hub, you can just hold tab on PC, your character will do a trust fall into the dirt and then spawn inside of your base hub, the Nightfold. And so this is where you're going to be doing all of your crafting, checking in on quests and doing things like that, and it's super cool that you can just zone in and out anytime you want. Just trust fall into the floor, appear where you were, trust fall back into the floor, go back into your hub, and do all of that. Now, when you first start, you're only going to have this initial hut, which you're going to do your customization on the other side for weapons and things like that, but as you progress the story and unlock new NPCs, you will find vendors that give you quests, upgrades, and crafting as well, and so you want to be coming back here often to grab your ancestors from the main map, bring them back, finish their quest lines, and unlock what you're trying to do. The most important one of these, in my opinion, is going to be the blacksmith. This is going to be where you're going to craft your gear. So if you're looking to craft things, craft new weapons, and get all of that, I would recommend getting the Tuvolcane blacksmith part done immediately so you can start crafting all these. And this functions very similar to Warframe in that these things have a required set of materials, and they also have a craft time plus a currency. And so once you farm up everything you need to get this weapon, or item or gear or whatever it is, or pact or totem, or whatever you're trying to, not totem, but if you want to try to craft something from this, you'll need to get the materials, activate it, farm it, and wait for it to finish in game. And unfortunately, a lot of the ancestors are very much locked behind exploration, so you might go long periods of time without finding some of these. So my recommendation is to do this right away. All you have to do to unlock the blacksmith is go to the center of map area right around here, which is close to where they spit you out in the very beginning, and then you just have to go over here, grab the helm, carry it to the next marker. Once you pick up the helm, it'll give you a marker from your guide bird. Follow that in, turn it in, and you'll unlock the blacksmith, and that way you'll be able to craft and do the rest of the game. There are other NPCs, other quests, other things you can unlock, but that one's a very important one that I didn't want to leave anyone behind on. Next, for exploration, since the game starts with a completely fog of war out map, you will need to find these world trees throughout the map. They have a very distinctive design when you walk up to them, and all you have to do is go to the side that has the tuning fork stuck into it, rip it out. It will reveal that portion of the map and show you the area, and it will give you a little bit of boost as well. So if you're trying to reveal the map, you need to go around and find these world trees. And in order to find stuff in this game, it's all about proximity in many cases, which means that the quest won't show up until you walk up to the building or run into the NPC or encounter the boss that's out on the map. So you actually have to forehead your way into things to get them to pop up. So if you're ever stuck and your guide bird's not doing anything, the best thing you can do is just start wandering around, running into camps, opening things, going down staircases, going into dungeons, and things will start to accrue as you go. Again, I also want to highlight these dungeons as well. There's 2 of them in the game right now. I don't want to show the other one because I don't want to show too much of the map for the people that want to save that for exploration. This is the first one you should encounter right after you get spit out from the tutorial. And again, these are repeatable, procedurally generated dungeons that also provide a large amount of the most important resources as well. And so usually what you'll end up doing once you're done exploring is you go and run these over and over, or do different versions of them. There's also like little puzzles and routes and mazes and things that you can do around the map, and tons of stuff to explore, bosses to kill that you can do, but this is going to be a big part of your rotation. Next, a couple notes on progression in general. The way the stats work in this is very Souls-like-esque. I know some people don't like it when you say that, but in general, you have your 3 primary stats: Spirit, Courage, and Grace. These generally have some application towards a lot of the abilities. A lot of times, Courage can add power to an ability. You can add duration. You can add speed to abilities as well, but it's not a one-to-one like that in general, just because not only does this affect your abilities, but it also affects your weapons. So some weapons will have a primary attribute that they scale off of. So you can see the attunement on the different weapons as well. So when you're making a build, you will choose a Pact, which sets your abilities. You will choose a weapon and sidearm, which might be scaled off the stats you're using. You also choose like different passives and bonuses through the trees that you unlock and the upgrades for your packs as well. So between all of these choices, you're kind of stitching together a playstyle that functions for you, but you have the option to keep farming more packs, which means more abilities, more weapons, more sidearms, and more bonuses. It's also worth noting that no matter what you put points into, every point you add will add an extra 10 HP to your life. So it is worthwhile kind of going through with these. You just have to decide like where you're going to be placing your points, what weapons you're using, what skills you're using, and what makes sense for your build at that time. Aside from that, that's pretty much all that I want to show on the game, because again, a lot of these kind of games is based on the discovery and exploration. And so you will find a lot more than I've shown here in this video outside of the map. There are world bosses and special encounters, and they will be adding more content as time goes on. But this gives you a solid foundation, I believe, for the game and exploration. If you have any tips and tricks for beginner players, drop that down in the comments down below. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.